Students, we are going to be looking at the Triassic period in Colorado. It's a very unique formation, and we don't have a lot of good exposure. So we're going to be comparing it to exposure that is better in places like New Mexico and Arizona. It's one of the unique things that we're going to be looking at here at CNCC to see what we can find. So let's look at first an image of the landscape. So you can see quite a bit of different things going on here. Some animals that we're definitely not familiar with, and some that we'll be getting familiar with later. We have some of our dinosaurs here, our very early mammals here. You recognize the pterosaurs. We'll introduce some of these others later. So a couple of formations we're dealing with from the Triassic. We have the Moenkopi, really just right after the Permian extinction, which you see labeled here. We have roughly about a 10 million year exposure. We do have some relatives of living animals that we recognize today. Others are going to be a little less familiar to you. So you're all pretty much familiar with amphibians. You're going to be familiar with the fish. You're probably not going to be so familiar with the rhynchosaurs, the dicynodonts. You might not even be familiar with the archosaurs, although you do know quite a few crocodiles and dinosaurs and birds actually come from that lineage. You're also going to be familiar more with arthropods, which are your crustaceans and a lot of your insects and spiders and so forth. You're going to be familiar with mollusks and annelids. Mollusks are your clams, and your annelids are going to be, interestingly enough, earthworms as well as leeches, those wonderful things. So here are some of the amphibians we're looking at. Of course, you can see that there are some distinct differences between the ones that we have today versus the ones that existed here. Here we have a Eocyclodosaurus. Now we're going to move on to a few others. We have from your left to right, we're going to be looking at Vigilus, Quasi-Cyclodosaurus, which is this guy up here, the skull of the Wellosaurus, where I left that purposely in there so you can see where the eye sockets are. And in many cases, amphibians can actually help swallow with pushing their eyes down. It aids in swallowing. That's usually a feature in frogs. We also see quite a bit of variety here with these different amphibians. We have this one with a very narrow snout that is known as Coscigiferus. We also have some of these other wonderful animals that we're going to get to here in just a second. This animal is a rhynchosaur. They have these really sharp beaks. These are, of course, something that has been extinct for quite some time now, would have died out at the end of the Triassic. And they do predate dinosaurs by quite a bit. Some more unique animals that we have here are our dicynodonts. These would have been very large herbivorous animals. You can see we have different sizes. They are holdovers from the Permian extinction, so they did survive that, but there is an extinction towards the end of this time period where they do not survive. And now we're going to get to the apex predator that's been found in this area during this time period. It's called, interestingly enough, Arizonosaurus, so you can guess where that one was found. You'll see a unique feature on it that you probably have seen in a few other animals like Dimetrodon and Spinosaurus. Dimetrodon, not a dinosaur, a little bit closer related to mammals. Arizonosaurus, not a dinosaur either, also has the little sail-like feature. You can see that it also has the legs directly underneath it, nice sharp teeth, and would have been the apex predator during the Moenkopi part of the Triassic. And with a lot of these different animals that we're seeing, a lot of them living in the water or near the water, gives us an idea that the ecosystem would have had a lot of this, these rivers and everything else. This is confirmed from the rocks that we see, which are going to give us some fine-grained sandstone, shales, mudstones, and limestones. Not a ton of energy in this environment because of the fine-grained sandstones and everything else. And the places where we find this formation are usually found alongside the Chinle, but there is a gap in where we see this, so that's a geologic unconformity, so a nice gap in the rock record. Again, everything here is pretty much just recovering from the first 10 million years after the biggest mass extinction that we know of during the Permian, where most of 95% of all life was pretty much gone. And we'll look at the next formation within the Triassic as well, so we have a good idea of what we're looking at there. And the Chinle is the next one. You can see the time frame up here, 230 to 201 million years ago. The rocks are going to show us a change in the environment, so we can get it from the rocks that the coast has retreated. We do have rivers and lakes and deserts because of the rocks that we're seeing, mudstones, siltstones, and sandstones. The lack of limestone tells us we don't have those coastal environments anymore, and that also means that evolution is working a little differently, and we're getting a nice radiation with a lot of these different kinds of animals that we're going to see within the Chinle. Here we have a list of them. We're going to see phytosaurs, aedosaurs, shuvosaurs, rauisuchids. Our dinosaurs are showing up at this point. Another group of animals called coelosaurids, trypanosaurs, the placerians, more of those dicynodonts. We'll see a slightly different variety of those. More lizards, amphibians, and a lot of different kinds of fish as well. So we're even getting some freshwater sharks at this time. And so let's look at some of those as well. So here are your phytosaurs. They look very much like crocodiles. The artist rendition that you're looking at also kind of is leaning into that interpretation as well. You'll notice some differences on the skull here, and this is where the nasal passages are for. So these are good semi-aquatic animals. You also notice, if you look at these directly on, that they do have a much more narrow snout than crocodilians do today. Skipped one here. Here's another unique set of animals. These are the aedosaurs. This is Desmatasuchus in particular. There's quite a few of these found throughout the Triassic. These are armored reptiles. Going to be something that may call back to something you're a little bit familiar with, ankylosaurs, but these have a very different lineage. Definitely not dinosaurs, showing different kinds of armor. So, again, not the first time things have been armored, and certainly won't be the last time. This is another animal here, the shuvosaurids. This one is known as Ephigia, and for some time it gave paleontologists a bit of excitement because they thought they'd found some of the first dinosaurs. As they looked a little closer, we did see some anatomical differences, which actually puts them a little bit closer to crocodilians than it does to dinosaurs. But again, some cool radiation and variation that we're seeing with the environment changing and niches being opened up after that extinction. And then one that you might be familiar with from the original Walking with Dinosaurs, this is Postosuchus. They'll say it's related to crocodiles, more distantly so, but you can see the very large skull here, and this one's looking like it can be a little bit bipedal, but could go from bipedal to quadrupedal. Probably one of the biggest predators during this late Triassic time in the Chinle. This is going to, again, look like a crocodile, but not really be terribly closely related to it. I'll show you another unique animal as well. This one is known as Revoltosaurus, shown without armor and with armor, because they did find it there. This is a herbivorous one. It's only about 1 meter long, and showing us that some unique features with the armor here. You'll notice that particularly the tail may again call back to ankylosaurs, but doesn't have any of that relation or any of that kind of solid structure that we're looking at when we think of those bone shattering kind of tail clubs that we're looking at. But again, some cool things that evolution is doing here, showing us the variety of creatures that we can find in the Triassic. Here we finally get our earliest dinosaurs. These, of course, are some small theropods. We have Tawa, Demonosaurus, and New Mexico's state fossil, the Coelophysis. These guys, of course, are going to be relatives of much bigger animals in the Jurassic. And notice that they're not all that large. Another animal, Coelosaurids, and again showing us the differences that reptiles are taking. So in some of these, the more reptilian forms, or at least things that are a little bit more closely related to these ancient lineages of reptiles, we're seeing that some cool things within the hip, showing that the legs are directly underneath, allowing them to move a lot faster, and they can still breathe as they're running, instead of our modern lizards, which have a more sprawling stance and don't have the ability to move in the same way that we would see in dinosaurs as well. These are unique animals here. These are tree-dwelling lizards known as trypanosaurs. Um, and it's the claws that are very unique, as well as some of the back here. These guys are going to be looking for bugs and so forth in the trees that are in the Triassic. Here's one of those dicynodonts. This is Placerius, also found in Walking with Dinosaurs, the more or less, I guess, the equivalent of a cow from modern day reference that we would have had. Again, these guys lived for a good amount of time, very successful during the Permian and the late Permian and the Triassic, but then the extinction towards the end of Triassic kind of wipes them out. As perspective, you'll notice from the initial slide that we saw, there's no such thing as grass during the Triassic and no flowers. We have a lot of gymnosperms, which you may be more familiar with, things like your conifers, with needles and cones instead of any sort of flowering plants. We also have a lot of ferns, as well as mosses that are going to be covering the ground instead of grass. So, thing to keep in mind is that the animals that we're going to be discovering, for the most part, especially within the Mesozoic, never would have seen grass, and most of them wouldn't have seen anything like flowers either. So, a very different environment than what we were used to. But that's the way things were back then. Here's an example of some of those plants. These guys over here are more closely related to ginkgos. This is one of the fossils they can find in Arizona. So again, these things are well adapted to drier conditions, better for living, and they do take off and do quite well during the Mesozoic and are the food of many, many herbivores. So one of the things that we're looking at here is the things that we have found here with the CNCC crew. So we have found various amounts of tracks, which are known as ichnofossils. They do give us a lot of good information as to some behavior and how fast these animals were moving. There is a certain amount of limitation that we have with these ichnofossils. We also have found some tree limbs and some bone fragments. You'll notice that in the parentheses, tentatively, we're thinking dinosaur because of the hollow bone structure that we're finding, but we do need to do some more work to confirm that and maybe even get a possible identification as to which dinosaur we're dealing with. And you guys will be helping us give us a more positive identification of some of these rocks so we know which formation we're looking at. And no matter which one it is, whether it's Moenkopi or Chinle, that's going to be great because of the limited exposure that we do have here in Colorado, and you'll be a part of that. So keep your eyes open and be ready to learn more.